Our nation needs bridges, and bridges are built by those who look to the future and dedicate themselves to helping others.
The greatness of our government comes from the fact that it is of, by, and for the people, win or lose.
I grew up on a cattle ranch on the New Mexico-Arizona border, and we were 35 miles from the nearest town. We only went to town once a week so we could get the mail and get some groceries, pay the bills, and then go back to the ranch. And it was really marvelous out there. I loved living on that ranch, and I sort of grew up on the back of a horse. President Reagan, 30 years ago, he wasn't sure that he was making headway with women voters. He thought, well, that was somewhat questionable. And so he started saying occasionally, now if I'm president, when I'm elected, he didn't say if, when I'm elected president, if I get a chance to fill a vacancy on the U.S. Supreme Court, I'd like to put a qualified woman on.
As president of the United States, I have the honor and the privilege to pick thousands of appointees to 4 positions in federal government. Each is important and deserves a great deal of care.
President Reagan had not been in office more than about 4 months when Justice Potter Stewart announced his retirement. And that meant there was going to be a vacancy to be filled.
In addition, as president, I have the privilege to make a certain number of nominations which have a more lasting influence on our lives, for they are the lifetime appointments of those men and women called upon to serve in the judiciary in our federal district courts and courts of appeals.
The phone rang. It was Ronald Reagan on the phone. Sandra, I'd like to announce your appointment on Monday. Is that all right with you? Oh, dear.
So today, I'm pleased to announce that upon completion of all the necessary checks by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I will send to the Senate the nomination of Judge Sandra Day O'Connor of Arizona Court of Appeals for confirmation as an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
191 years, no woman, then me. Another 12 years, finally a second woman, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I retire, and today we have 3 women on the U.S. Supreme Court. 3!
She is truly a person for all seasons, possessing those unique qualities of temperament, fairness, intellectual capacity, and devotion to the public good, which have characterized the 101 brethren who have preceded her.
From his inauguration message, he explained that this appointment of his to the court symbolized the richness of opportunity that still abides in America. Opportunity that permits persons of any sex, age, or race, from every section and every walk of life, to aspire and achieve in a manner never before even dreamed about in human history.
Now, just a minute. I've got to look for a second. Find something. Hard to find. Have you ever tried to find anything in a woman's purse? Don't start it. It's impossible. All right. This is what I carry with me always. You know what it is? It's the Constitution of the United States. There are legal principles out there that we have promised to follow in our system of government. And it all starts right here.
We've entrusted you with our ideals and our freedom, and our future depends on the way you define it today. It's a sacred trust whose burden can only be carried by the highest quality of men and women.
Welcome to A Bridge Builder and Trailblazer, celebrating Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. Please welcome Executive Director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, Mr. John Highbush.
Good afternoon. For those I've not had a chance to meet, my name is John Highbush, and I have the honor of being the Executive Director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. Thank you all for coming out this afternoon. If you would, in honor of our men and women in uniform who defend our freedom around the world, please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. In the fall of 1988, when President Ronald Reagan broke ground at the site of his future presidential library, I'm not sure that he could have imagined that his foundation, the one bearing his name, would one day also be operating a robust institute in Washington, D.C., one just steps from the White House he would soon leave behind for his beloved home and ranch in the West. However, I do know that today's celebration honoring Justice Sandra Day O'Connor is exactly the type of gathering in his name that he envisioned. History intrinsically links President Reagan and Justice O'Connor, and it is an honor and a privilege for the Reagan Foundation and Institute to host this forum. Before we begin our celebration, I'd like to express our gratitude to our friends in the room who still carry the flame of our 40th president, and those who share a deep love and admiration for our first woman on the Supreme Court. First, thanks to the O'Connor family for joining us on this historic day. Thanks as well to our thought partners who share in our civic mission and who have helped us craft our agenda for this afternoon. Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, NPR, the Aspen Institute, Arizona State University Sandra Day O'Connor School of Law, the Supreme Court, and of course, the Library of Congress. The force behind today's event is a longtime member of the Reagan Foundation's Board of Trustees, a partner at Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, and a legal legend himself, Ted Olson. One of our nation's premier appellate and Supreme Court advocates, Ted served as the Solicitor General of the United States from 2001 through 2004. Prior to that time, he served as an Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Legal Counsel at the Justice Department during the Reagan administration from 1981 to 1984, and as private counsel to President Reagan during his second term in office. Ted's commitment to the principles of equality, liberty, and justice not only served President Reagan, but also helped him carry his legacy into the 21st century. It's his leadership that led to today's worthy celebration of Justice O'Connor. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage Mr. Ted Olson.
Well, thank you, John, and thank every one of you for being here. Everyone that's been involved in this is very, very excited, and we're full of anticipation. It's an honor to be with you 38 years to the day after Sandra Day O'Connor took her seat as the first woman to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. Our Constitution was adopted on September 17, 1787. The government it created, including the Supreme Court, began functioning in 1789. Nearly 200 years later, on this date in 1981, Justice O'Connor became the 102nd and first female justice. Reflect on that for a moment. It took us, our nation, and our people nearly 2 centuries to put the first woman on the United States Supreme Court. I was privileged to be in court that day. President Reagan was there, members of the cabinet were there, senators, representatives, the justices, and members of the press and public watched as the court received from Attorney General William French Smith the commission signed by President Reagan, and the oath of office was administered by the Chief Justice, and then Justice O'Connor was escorted to the bench and took her seat. It was a very special, emotional moment, and I feel emotion talking about it, but much too long in coming. Justice O'Connor served for 25 years on the Supreme Court with brilliance, a keen understanding of the Constitution and of the American people, compassion, insight, wisdom, grace, and dignity. She had spent her early years on a 198,000-acre cattle ranch in Arizona. She had graduated near the top of her class at Stanford Law School, was the first majority leader of a state senate, and the last justice, I think this is correct, to have served in elective office, and as a state appeals court judge. As a justice, she had a sharp, incisive sense of humor, an instinct for the pivotal point in the cases that came before her, and a passion for preparation. Hers was often the first question asked during oral argument. I had the privilege of arguing a number of cases before her during her tenure, and I was very careful every time to try to be ready for that first question. Woe to the lawyer who was not prepared, fumbled, or responded with evasion. It did not work. She zeroed in like a laser beam, and you did not get away. About 11 months ago, Justice O'Connor wrote to the American people informing us that the progression of dementia meant that she had to step back from public life. It was devastating to read that this terrible disease was robbing her and robbing us of that unstoppable mind. 25 years ago, President Reagan wrote to the American people in much the same way. He announced that he was beginning what he called the, quote, the journey that will lead me into the sunset of my life. Justice O'Connor is on that same tragic sunset journey, which is why we at the Reagan Institute were moved to organize a celebration of her legacy. How we wish she were here, but how grateful we are that she was the brilliant, perfect pioneer on our highest court, and that we can celebrate her while she still enjoys the company of family back home in Arizona, a place where the sunsets are among the most beautiful in the world. Along with other things that we hear about here to celebrate, we honor her as a bridge builder, an idea she reflected on in a Stanford 2004 commencement address just days after the passing of President Reagan. She told the students that one of the most important bridges that Ronald Reagan built was a bridge to equality, one that made it possible for a wide range of willing Americans to build their own bridges as public servants. She, of course, was referring in part to her own nomination. Today, we are fortunate to welcome many of the people who have crossed that bridge that Justice O'Connor built throughout her career, from former clerks to sitting justices of the United States Supreme Court and to many others. They will tell us about who this incredible woman was, how she was raised on that ranch in Arizona, how she developed into the ideal jurisprudential pioneer to be the first of her gender to sit on the Supreme Court, what it was like for her to surmount the barriers that she so gracefully overcame, and what she has done for America, the Constitution, and the American people. So I welcome you to this celebration and thank in advance our outstanding moderators and speakers. This will be a lovely, happy day. Thank you.